Welcome back to Hollywood Impact, and it is our first film review of 2025.
Let's go.
Very excited. So welcome, and if you haven't seen us, thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about the new Wolfman.
It is a new film, horror genre. It is directed by Lee Wannell. You know, could be Leigh Wannell. I don't know.
Something.
But, so here's the story. Blake and his family are attacked by an unseen animal and, in a desperate escape, barricade themselves inside a farmhouse as the creature prowls the perimeter. As the night stretches on, however, Blake begins to behave strangely, transforming into something unrecognizable that soon jeopardizes his wife and daughter.
We usually like to break these down in about 5 categories, and that goes the performances, the story, the music, the visuals, and the impact, which is something specific to us. So let's go ahead and get started with the first category, and that is, how are the performances in this movie?
They're not bad, especially for a horror movie. I really like the main actor. And I think he does a good job of making me believe that he is truly transforming into something else.
Yeah.
Especially he's not, when he first starts like noticing something's wrong.
Yeah.
He does a really good job of displaying like, I am freaked out, unsure of what's going on, and he walks such a fine line of the animal instincts, like almost taking over, and then resorting back to human, and then back to fighting the inner wolf.
Yeah, he's got that dog in him, but he's trying to fight it.
You can never fight the dog.
You get to fight that dog.
And I think the madam from Ozark, she does a decent job as well. Whenever the writing is there, I think there's some writing flaws that make the characters make some strange decisions, but she sets early on the expectation that I'm not sure of myself in my marriage, and she does a good job of making me believe like, oh yeah, you actually look like you are struggling internally without blatantly explaining, all the time. Like she only gives that one line at the beginning, like, yeah, I'm not happy. And then the way her emotions are displayed on her face, like I can see that she's struggling internally.
Yes.
Like with how she handles being a mother and being a wife.
I personally think that she's the strongest actress or actor in the film. Her facial expressions, her ability to show genuine like fear is, I think, pretty good in this movie. Even the daughter, like, her lines are pretty good. She delivers them well. I think it would have been better if she didn't seem as fearful about stuff, and maybe that was because like she's in this film, she's very attached to her father. Yeah, and I get that, but like if I was so attached to somebody like that, if they were to transform that way, I would feel more terrified because you knew the person that they were. Yeah. And so I don't feel like she's like maybe 11, 12 years old. I feel like she could have acted a little bit more genuinely terrified of the situation, but it seemed like she was more just confused. Right. And I get that. She's a child. Yeah. But like if I was 12 years old and I saw my dad doing that, I'd be like, that dude's possessed. He's got that demon. Yeah. But no, it's pretty solid across the board.
She's a decent enough child actor. She hits the initial like scary thing that happens. She hits a certain level of fear, and it kind of stays the same throughout the whole movie. Like her level of scared doesn't really change much, but she does decent. It doesn't make you mad. Like you're thinking, oh, what a terrible child.
No, it's definitely not that.
Just average.
Yeah, just average.
Yeah, it'll do.
The next category, the story. The story is actually one of my least favorite portions of this film. It's simple, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I think in a lot of cases, a lot of people overcomplicate and overfluff their films. This one's not. This one is a simple story. Yeah. However, it doesn't always work in its favor, because when it has unanswered questions, there's little to no context behind it. Yeah. And that's a little frustrating. It does not follow what I would believe to be standard werewolf rules. You and I talked about this. Yeah. So if you're going in expecting like the werewolves from the Underworld series, like the werewolf from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, that sort of thing, or even the Wolfman film with Benicio del Toro which is one of my favorites. It's not that type of werewolf, and I don't quite like what they did with that, and they're not exactly clear about its abilities.
Yeah.
There's a few things that they're blatantly clear about, like the ability to see in the night, that sort of thing. However, it doesn't follow rules like, okay, like what time of day, how often, how fast can it go. Those things are inconsistent, and it treats it more just like an actual disease, like a illness, rather than like a mystical urban legend type thing. And that just didn't quite work for me.
Yeah, well, and they also have that, they set that expectation early. They tell you that in the opening crawl text, like, this is a disease, from ancient times that the natives call whatever.
The face of the wolf.
Yeah, I don't know the native
specific language that they use.
It was weird.
I can't read that, actually. Yeah. Actually, I can't see that.
Yeah. And so, it's just classics, horror story. It's Yeah. It's definitely the worst part, I think, and that's pretty typical for a horror movie. I mean, you're not getting anything different here, nothing game changing for the genre. Just a normal, really plot holy, missing like character making sense decisions. Yeah. It's eh.
Yeah, it's eh. There are bits and pieces where I'm like, okay, like I get why you did this. That was smart. So why did you do this?
Yeah.
And they're not super, and I know like a lot of horror films, they have like inconsistencies and like, oh well, don't do that. If you're trying to be smart, do that. And it just doesn't, it's not the same here. Moving on to the music, which I'm going to include kind of just the general audio in this film. Strongest portion of this film. Yeah. Which ironically for the last like maybe 10 films that we've done, the music's been like the weakest portion. Yeah. But in this movie, it's pretty top notch. The sound effects that they use for certain things, especially when the father is kind of going through the transformation.
Oh yeah.
Very, very cool.
Yes.
No spoilers, but there is a scene where he initially starts to transform like slowly, and they use some sound stuff which kind of freaks you out for a little bit, and it's not what you expect. Yeah. And I'm like, that's clever. Yeah. That's so cool. And then they completely don't make it consistent because other things happen, and it's so hard to explain, so hard not to talk about it.
Yeah, you'll know what we mean when you see it, because like it's so, they set this expectation of like his power, and then never utilize it again.
Never ever again.
That's the coolest scene in the whole movie, in my opinion, because you're very tense, like, oh my gosh, I'm scared, and then you see it and you're like, oh,
you're like, that's freaky.
That's really cool. And then they never utilize it again.
It never gets used ever again.
But the sound design still good throughout the movie.
Still very good, and the background music is pretty solid, very eerie, classic.
They have a strong piece at the end of the movie. I thought that was a nice composition. I think notably, they actually, one of the bigger strengths for the audio design for me was they knew when to not have music.
Yes,
they did a very good job in the silent parts. Like every single time I was like, oh yeah, I'm tense. And I'm not thinking about, man, I wish there was music here. It's like, it lends well to the tense, eerie feeling whenever it's silent. Very good decision making on when we're going to have the eerie crawl and when we're going to be silent and just have you look.
Yes.
I really enjoyed that.
Me too. The visuals. Visuals are also pretty solid, pretty standard. There's a lot of shots of the overview of the setting that they're in, which is in Oregon. Yep. And you see like the mountainous, very forest-heavy type environment, lots of fog. Very cool atmosphere. Yes. I really like the setting. However, I get it's more of a bland film, but their color usage I don't think is that great. It's a lot of like dark grays and browns and like kind of like a very, very, very pale bluish gray for a lot of things, if you're not counting the trees, which are green. I think that one thing that really bothers me that I told you in the theater is, and I just said earlier, I don't like the design of the werewolf. It is less werewolf-like and more zombie-like.
Yeah, it's really zombie-ish.
I'm not trying to give you like an explicit. Yeah. It definitely, because it plays off more as like an illness. When the transformation starts happening, you're expecting like these bone cracking, turns into a giant, stout, hairy beast, and it's just not that. And that took me out of the film because I'm like, Yeah, it's freaky, and I would be scared to see someone going through such a thing, but it could have been much scarier.
Yeah.
And they spend the first half of the film not really showing the werewolf-ish much, and then when they do show it, it doesn't hit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna remember
sick
it.
dude.
Like, I'm never going to forget it, but not because it was that impactful or that scary or that intense, but because it was that weird. And I was like, I don't really care for that. Like, it's not super hairy. I'm not trying to give like explicit details about it, but it's not what I thought. And you you have to kind of rein in your expectations, but I feel like they used a lot of practical effects, which is good.
Yeah.
But I feel like the design of the lycanthropy itself could have been way better.
Yeah. And it's another classic. They show too much in the trailer. Most of the main scares you see in the trailer, so not all of them hit as hard visually, so it's whatever. But there is one of my favorite things in the beginning using visuals. The first time you see a wolf in the very beginning, whenever he's looking through the scope, that kind of stuff just personally really creeps me out.
Yeah, that was creepy.
Where you're panning somewhere and there's again no audio, like there's no loud screech when you see it. It just he's panning and it's eventually standing there where you looked before and he wasn't there, and I was like,
for like a brief moment.
Yeah, I'm like, ooh, this is right up my alley of what creeps me out.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking, in real life and I think I see something and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is literally what scares me.
Put it down and there's nothing there,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh no.
So I wish there was more of that. They do a decent job, but yeah, as the movie goes on, it's less and less impactful.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of impactful, the impact. So that is its lasting effects on the audience and kind of how rewatchable is it, what kind of splash is it going to make with people. And I think generally, I think some people will like it. I'm not sure if everyone will care for it.
Yeah.
When I tried to explain it to my wife on the way home from work, she told me to change the subject because it was too boring. And that's tough because that has never happened.
Yeah.
Like, I've never explained a movie to her where she's had to physically, or she has had verbally tell me, hey, I love that you went and saw that movie, but I'm going to fall asleep if you keep talking about it. And I'm like, that's
tough.
That's tough. And I'm like, God, I don't see myself rewatching this ever.
Yeah.
Unless somebody, like one of my friends, really wants to.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But I'm going to forget this in just a couple of days. I'm going to move on to better stuff. I watched a movie right before it that was way better. And we'll get to that review at some point soon. But no, its impact score, I think, is a little low.
Yeah,
on this time.
And I'll say that you seeing a better movie beforehand does not sway your opinion.
No.
I also believe it's a pretty low impact film. It's a horror movie, guys. And it's not game changing.
I was really excited for it. I was more excited for that than the first one I saw.
Yeah.
So I was still hyped out of the movie. I was like, oh yeah, I saw this cool film. Now I'm gonna go see werewolves because werewolves is one of my favorite things. I'm like, actually, I don't really like this movie too much. And that's tough.
Yeah.
There are things about it that are so cool in this movie. And I felt like if they really capitalized on some of those things and I think reworked some of the design and stuff, this movie could have been really good.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yeah. I think this would have done well as a one take movie.
Yeah.
Like one continuous shot, in the woods, making it to the house. Potential for that. It's not very rewatchable. I'll only rewatch it if I'm somewhere else and someone else picked the movie. It's not a terrible movie. It's not a bad movie.
No, it's not a bad movie. It's not good.
Yeah.
I would not classify it as a good film. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
It's an all right film. I think it would work really well as a YouTube horror short.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. I think it would work very well for that case. Give it 15, 20 and just have the layout of the Oregon.
Yeah.
A lot of their opening stuff where they're where the beast is in the woods and you don't know if it's there or not.
Nah.
That kind of stuff was really effective. I would say the first half was a lot better than the second half. It's time to give our score. I'm going to go first because he asked me to go first right before this. I'm going to go with 6.8 out of 10.
Oh, okay.
I think anything 7 and above is a good film, and I don't think it quite reaches there. I think it's right under that mark, and so I think it's fine. It's a 6.8. I think certain people who just absolutely love horror films and love werewolf films will probably think it's good. Most of them, I don't think will think it's great.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be fair.
Yeah, it's it's decent. I think on my scale, 6 would be considered good. I think this is just a perfectly average film, so I'm gonna give it a 5.
I see.
It's not. I know a lot of people hear 5 and think bad. Just my personal scale.
5 for him is like average.
5 is literally the line. It is average, and I think that's right where this movie sits.
This reminds me, this isn't completely off topic, this reminds me of a good mythical morning because Rhett and Link's scales are completely different in being able to rank something. And so, like, for me, I think of it like a test. Like, oh, if I did a 70%,
Yeah,
I did
average,
good.
yeah.
If I got 68 on my test, I didn't do good.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't do bad, but I didn't do good enough.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I score my
Yeah.
stuff.
For me, it's like if I'm gonna be able to differentiate bad movies, I need to be able to have like 5 through 1 like actually discernible at the differences. And so, yeah, I end up giving a lot of movies 7s if they're like decent, but I'm working on it.
IGN?
Yeah, I'm trying not to be IGN.
I don't think any of us should be.
Yeah, so
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, if you want to see more of us, then ring that notification bell to keep up with all of our content.
there's some good stuff coming this year, so stay tuned.
There is got a lot of good stuff. But always, have a good one.
Bye bye.